Hello, everyone. So I am Emma Serlin, and I'm the founder of London Speech Workshop. And I am so excited to be here with you today. We have had such a massive take-up. Over 400 people have signed up today. And I think it shows just how topical the subject of imposter syndrome is and how relevant it is for so many people. So I'm really delighted to say you're going to walk away with some excellent strategies and tools, some from London Speech Workshop and some from our amazing guest speakers. And we have three incredible panelists today who have come to talk to us. So before I talk about them, we're going to just say that actually at London Speech Workshop, we work with a lot of clients who do have imposter syndrome, and we've developed tools that really do help them. So we're going to be sharing some of that as well today. So our incredible speakers, firstly, we've got Singleton. She is an education specialist at EDN with 25 years of experience in developing training and also management. And at the moment, she's been developing a suite of leadership programs for women specifically. And EDN regularly do reports and surveys, an annual report actually, on imposter syndrome. So she is a wealth of knowledge about imposter syndrome, which is fantastic. We have Michelle Minnikin, who's a psychologist, a coach, and an author. She's also the author and the voice behind something called Good Girl Deprogramming. So she describes herself as an unapologetic rebel, and she is really rethinking in the ways in which women are programmed and how to dismantle that programming so that they can own their voice and their journey and move away from various constraints. So really excited to hear from her as well. Finally, and last but not least, we've got the amazing Katie Eborall, who is an integrated communications expert. She's also head of North at Grayling, and she's very, very senior and has had loads of management experience, building teams, working with people who have climbed their way up through the ranks. So she is also a membership secretary for Women in PR. Now that's really interesting. It's a non-profit. And actually one of their angles is that, or one of their areas of sort of interest is that actually while PR is dominated by women in senior roles, there's actually really not many women at all. So it'll be really interesting to get her perspective today. And obviously we're aware that imposter syndrome isn't just a female issue. It crosses for both genders. So we'll be exploring that too. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome on Chris to share some of her story. A little introduction on Chris. Over to you.
Hello, Emma. Hello, everyone who's watching and listening to this. I'm honored to be here. It's, as you say, it's something that permeates society and is very, very topical at the moment. A little bit about my background. I'm, as you can tell, South African. So started off studying neuropsychology for a few years, then went into management, as one does. One spends years at university and then doesn't use the degree. And managed for about 13 years in South Africa, including being a marketing manager for a hotel on the Wild Coast, which was wild, on the eastern coast of South Africa. Then moved into management. I GM'd a hotel for a year. I did it extraordinarily badly. I literally saw them walking down the passage the one day and thought, oops, and fired myself before they fired me. I was no good at it at all. I then decided that, you know, what do they say? Those that can do and those that can't teach. So it was probably safer for me to retreat from operational lines and start telling other people what to do. And I've been doing that ever since. So 2005, I've had training businesses in South Africa and Botswana. And I joined HIT and their EDN, their Executive Development Network division in 2018. So that's me in a nutshell. I suppose if I'm a specialist at anything, it's management and learning and development.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. So interesting. Lots of touch points there, which we'll come to. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to Michelle Minnikin to give us her bio. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited about this and where are we going to go with it. So yes, I am Michelle Minnikin. I am a chartered organisational psychologist, coach and author of the book Good Girl Deprogramming. And it's a look at how society keeps women and girls behaving through various methods of coercive control. So it's a heavy read. There are some funny bits in it. So effectively my work revolves around helping women and break free from all of the ways that we have been taught to play small and help them rise above. So with various programs and workshops and obviously the book. So yes, so I am here as your rebellious one. So thank you for having me.
Amazing. Well, we always have to have a rebellious one. That's wonderful. Thank you. And now finally, let's welcome Katie Eborall. Look forward to hearing your bio.
Hi Emma, thank you for having me. So I'm Katie Eborall. I am a specialist in integrated communications. I'm here today representing women in PR. As Emma said at the outset, as in the industry of PR, we over-index with women at more junior levels, but don't seem to retain them in leadership positions. So we exist to help support women into those positions and make sure that women can reach their full potential within the sector. In my day job, I'm in the senior leadership team at Grayling. I sit on our management board and I've got about 20 years experience in the sector. So it's lovely to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we definitely have a very brilliant team. So thank you. We're going to kick off with actually looking to understand what imposter syndrome is, so that cracking open piece. So Chris, we're going to start with you, if that's okay. And I'd love to know, I know EDN's done a big report on imposter syndrome. I'd love to know a little bit about the findings of it and maybe something about the scale of the issue as well. So if you can talk to us a bit in general about that, that'd be wonderful. Over to you.
Yes, Emma, we surveyed about 5,000 people to have a look at the prevalence of imposter syndrome. And as you say, it does span both genders. We found that almost half, I mean, that's an astonishing number. 50% of the people we surveyed indicated back to us that they'd had imposter syndrome at some stage in their lives. And it affects women more than men. Our percentages came out at 54% women versus 38% men. So there is that sort of 16% swing between the two. It's also interesting that it affects different groups of people in different ways. For instance, one of our findings was that people who identify as bisexual, 69% of them reported imposter syndrome. Those that identified themselves as homosexual, 57%, and that goes across both genders. Compared to that sort of average of half, you can see that as soon as you're almost in a minority, as soon as you feel targeted, as soon as you feel less supported, less represented, it seems to be that imposter syndrome increases. Another stat we found out is that younger people have imposter syndrome far more often than older people. People my age, in their 60s, about 25% of them, versus Gen Z, 66%, and millennials, 58%. So it's the younger people in our businesses, in our organizations, in our workforces who seem to be less sure of themselves, feeling that they're fakes, that they shouldn't be in the room. And that's quite a worrying trend if it continues. Higher educated people experience it more. Almost 2/3 of people with PhDs report imposter syndrome versus 1/3 of people who have been educated to secondary education level.
Wow.
That reflects an industry, the industry that Katie's representing, PR, HR, advertising, marketing. The prevalence of imposter syndrome in those sectors averages between sort of high 60s and 70s. And we weren't sure, we didn't postulate too much around this, whether this is because these are industries where women are prevalent as cases in those lower ranks, and whether it might be one of the factors that contributes to the fact that they don't rise. I mean, there are other reasons why women don't rise to the top of the corporate ladder, but whether it's something that we're holding ourselves back because we don't feel good enough. The highest sector is 78% imposter syndrome in science and pharmaceuticals. And again, that's possibly that higher education piece, those PhDs, those people with that are university educated, and right down through the sectors to the lowest evidence of imposter syndrome: property and construction, transport and logistics. And
Chris,
women thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Do we think that's because the property and logistics, is that because it's more male dominated and there is less of a gender imbalance? Is that the thinking?
It might be where that initial higher prevalence within women is being reflected back in the industries. Higher prevalence with higher educated people is being reflected back in the sector, and that sort of thing. And those industries that are dominated by women, those sort of softer skills, like the marketing, the PR, the HR, those types of things. It's interesting. Katie, I don't know if we're going to get to that during that, but otherwise Katie and I are going to carry on a conversation afterwards.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So Katie, did you have thoughts about sort of why in particularly, I guess, PR?
I mean, I would definitely agree with what Chris has said. We are an industry that's highly dominated by women at those junior levels, potentially because of the type of skill set that we look for within the industry. It's very creative, which we know girls lean a lot more towards. Copywriting is an integral part of it. So you're thinking about those key core English skills that girls naturally gravitate towards. It's interesting what you say about property and transport as well, actually, Chris, because they're two of my key sectors. And I would say that they are, at the very, very, operational levels, there are a lot of women kind of who are in those functions that are kind of more kind of, marketing, PR, HR. But, when you're talking about kind of more of the professional vocations, they under index on women, and those industries actually have a challenge to get more women into those professional roles as well. So I would agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, there's so many boxes to open here, aren't there? So Michelle, do you have something that is sort of in terms of the female aspect? Because obviously we're hearing that there's not insignificant, it's like 38% of men struggle with imposter syndrome as well. So what are your thoughts, Michelle, on the gender separation between imposter syndrome?
I think it's fascinating looking at how sort of bisexual, same-sex attracted humans are sort of up there as well. And I think it's because I'm going to go straight in with it. I think it's because the workplace was designed for white, heterosexual men who had support networks at home, thinking, let's talk about Mr. Banks from Mary Poppins. And, he literally, his entire contribution to raising his children is obviously providing for them, but then patting them on the head and sending them off to bed. And this is the sort of the legacy that we have been asked so many times to lean into. So it's not a huge surprise that I believe, obviously, that feelings of being an imposter are valid and legitimate, but I don't think it's our fault. I think it's the environment. I think toxic and exclusionary environments are what cause us to feel like we're not safe, that we don't belong, and then we internalize it because there's nowhere else to do, because we changing all of these environments at once is going to be difficult. So while we're looking at how to fix it, we tend to blame ourselves. And I think women and other sort of minorities that's the only thing we can do effectively.
So interesting. And Chris, would you agree that the environment is really key? Because I'm thinking if it's so prevalent in PR and sort of more creative industries as well. And also I'm curious, you haven't mentioned finance, where I'm thinking it's so, Mr. Banks. So where, does it come up in finance? What's that, because science and pharmaceuticals is obviously, I think, within that cliche of, set up by this sort of the white male and in a very sort of patriarchal way, I guess. So yeah, where does finance come in, and what do you think about it in the softer industries as well?
I haven't got finance in our figures, but I'm just wanting to see whether I've got a bigger picture here. It comes up highly in there, in those sort of traditionally, as you say, Michelle, those traditionally male sort of areas. Emma, you were talking a little earlier about me doing some training on this now. And one of the things we're trying to do at EDN is to sort of debunk this idea that women are better at certain jobs, and Katie's nodding. We've got this almost like, lean in, use your feminine traits. So go into something soft and fluffy that involves sort of teddy bears and, being nice to people. And that's an idea we've been socialized into. That's an idea we've got to almost debunk, that we're sort of almost encouraging women, even now. We're saying to them, rise up the ladder, but rise up in something that you're safe in, or you're good at, or you're because you're a girl. So it comes through, doesn't it? We're still pushing in the wrong sectors, and it does put pressure on people, doesn't it? As soon as you become the only one in the room, Michelle's got something to say.
I find really fascinating is, do women and girls have imposter syndrome while they're at school and university?
Such an interesting question. And possibly now with the rise of social media, there's all kinds of syndromes going on. So
like low self-esteem, etc. But
I don't look like the other person. I should look like this. I should sound, etc. Katie, I'm really interested to hear from you about where you think the environment, which is obviously less male dominated, I assume. I don't really know PR. So where do you think the environment and imposter syndrome in the PR industry and similar comes in?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is that I think that we do have a lot of men within the industry as well. We tend to retain the men better at those leadership levels and lose the women from the industry for one reason or another. So we've got a lot of women at junior levels, and we do have quite a high amount of men at those senior leadership levels. My observation mainly, I think, about the difference between men and women and imposter syndrome within that environment, rightly or wrongly, is that male imposter syndrome tends to come in because there's a fear of failure because of a specific challenge, whereas for women, it's more of an ongoing day-to-day thing that they just face by being a woman in a workplace that is set up traditionally for white men. And so I think that it manifests in slightly different ways.
So interesting. Chris, does your data support that men and women, have different experiences of it?
Yes, it does. And I know that Valerie Young identified 5 different types of imposter syndrome. And I don't know if you want me to run through them quickly now, Emma, or whether you'd like me to hold that back for a minute. But I think that
I think we'd love to know.
Right straight into what Katie's saying there. I mean, Valerie Young is one of the pioneers of imposter syndrome. Says that she identified 5 archetypes. She says that there's the perfectionist, the person who is mainly concerned with anxiety about how things are done. I have to get this right. I have to be absolutely perfect. And I listened to a webinar a couple of years ago where one of the panelists was about to address Parliament. Now, if that's not a sign of success, you're being asked to address Parliament. And she was walking the streets of London at 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to find a printing shop that would be open so she could print her speech again for about the 17th time because it wasn't perfect. So that's the one type. The next one is the expert, who fears lacking knowledge and being exposed as a fool. So that's that sort of second thing. I don't know this well enough. And that might tie in with that whole university piece, because the only time I've ever felt anything close to being an imposter, and I do feel a bit of an imposter on the imposter syndrome panel, because I've never been much of an imposter. I'm far too bumptious. But, you know, that the only time I ever did feel a bit of it was when I felt my knowledge was being threatened, that I wasn't as knowledgeable as everyone else. The other one is the soloist. The person who feels they have to do things alone, who won't ask for help, who won't, receiving help or asking anybody else is a failure. Then you get what Jung calls the natural genius, the person who stresses over not being successful the first time they do anything. So they have to get it right the first time, or they have failed, they're not good enough. And then finally, the superhuman, the person who has to please everyone. And there's Michelle nodding. But
wow, that's nice. Amazing. Yeah, and I think probably really useful, certainly for us here and hopefully the listeners as well, in terms of like, well, which one do you have? So
which one am I?
Yeah. So we're going to move on to the next bit, but just before we do, I just have a quick, like a speed fire round of a question for you. What are the most common life moments or triggers, do you think, for imposter syndrome? And if you could each kind of tell me, just 2 or 3 that come up, that would be really interesting. Chris, let's start with you.
I think for me, it's that moment when you're put under pressure, where you suddenly, you're put into a position. I think for us, one of the big ones these days is accidental management. I think a lot of people are pushed into management, before they're ready. And they suddenly get to that feeling when they're not ready, so they feel like they are an imposter. I shouldn't be here. So that for me is one of the big ones.
Brilliant. Michelle?
So it's any time you're doing something new, I think is the big one. It's that kind of, what is the difference between like a perfectly logical and rational self-doubt and learning and newness and imposter syndrome? So I think that's sort of gets squished together in my experience and that of my clients.
Lovely. Yeah. And Katie?
I agree with both Chris and Michelle, but the one thing that I would add to it is when you are the only person of something in a situation. So you're the only PR person in the room, you're the only woman in the room, you're the only person from a lower socioeconomic background in the room, all of those things that we bring to the table that I guess kind of highlight our differences.
Brilliant. Yes, so interesting. And I guess from all of those, my thoughts to add, which is actually a new thought, because a client was talking, or a coach was talking about their clients who have perimenopause. And I was like, oh, that, the symptoms sound like imposter syndrome of like, who am I now? And my memory is going, not reliable. And so I'm thinking actually also those life moments of like returning to work after a baby, or after, paternity leave or maternity leave, through to perimenopause. It's sort of anything that kind of disengages you from regular, your status quo. So yeah, interesting. So now we're going to move on to the next bit, which is we all get to hear about your personal experiences of imposter syndrome. And Katie, I'd love to reverse it this time and start with you, if that's okay. So I think the question is, have you experienced imposter syndrome in your life? And if you have, can you tell us a bit about it and how, if you did, how you overcame it?
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I experience imposter syndrome on a day-to-day basis. I would say it is less so now than it ever has been at any point in my life, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't follow me around. I can't even remember when imposter syndrome first started, but the first big example that I have of it was going to university, interestingly enough, Michelle, because for the first time I was all of a sudden surrounded by people who weren't necessarily from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, people who skied twice a year and, went to private schools and taught like they'd swallowed a dictionary. And I can remember just feeling completely out of my depth, sat in this seminar and thinking, why am I here? This is not the place for me. And only really feeling validated after getting some really good results back off my first essay, and then seeing some of these people not naturally getting these results and being like, oh, okay, I do belong here. I am okay here. But I think, you know, it manifests in lots of different ways for me. I mean, even coming onto this webinar today, I was thinking, gosh, there's these three incredible, amazing women. Am I going to bring something valuable to this discussion? I actually just said to a junior colleague over lunch, you know, I'm just a person who does PR. And she was like, no, you're not. I can't believe you think that way. But, you know, it manifests itself in everyday kind of situations for me. I think it's made worse by situations where I need to appear to be in control of something and I don't fully feel in control of it. And, you know, I am definitely what I would describe as a recovering perfectionist. I think I'm probably in that bracket, Chris. But, you know, in particular for me, kind of, you know, big pitch scenarios where I'm leading big cross-agency teams and there's a lot of moving parts. And if I, for example, have a senior male colleague undermine something that I do during that process, it really, really brings the imposter syndrome to the surface and makes me feel quite anxious. So yeah, those are just a few examples of mine.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting because obviously I think that's the thing. It's this kind of undercover secret that so many people hold and we don't know about, you know, present. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michelle, it would be lovely to hear from you. Thank you, Katie.
So yeah, Katie, like you, I was the first person in my family on all sides to go to university. You know, miners and farm labourers were my grandparents. So it was an interesting one. So, but I was literally Hermione Granger at school. So people pleasing, perfectionistic, able to adapt to all the different authority figures. So I was quite, you know, liked by the teachers because I could be who they wanted me to be, which is painful. But stepping in, can you imagine going to university for 4 years, learning all about the ways that organizations should be run in terms of, you know, what's best practice, how to get the best out of people, you know, engagement, organizational design, and then stepping foot into work thinking, well, what is this? What is all of this? None of this makes sense. It's like the opposite of what I've just spent 4 years learning. So that was an interesting one. But I think the biggest imposter syndrome panic for me was when I was publishing my book. So there are different types of psychologists. So you have the clinical psychologists that look after, you know, mentally ill people, and, you know, they work for the NHS and stuff. And I always see them as like the proper psychologists. And I was panicking when I was publishing my book, all about, you know, how we're conditioned through various aspects of coercive control to behave and what we can do about it. That like the proper psychologists will be like up in arms with their pitchforks and torches outside of my house. So what I did to overcome that is I sent the manuscript to a bunch of people who absolutely loved it, and they were proper clinical psychologists. And I was like, okay. And I got this sort of stamp of approval from, I think, the more rebellious ones, let's face it. But yeah, that was
I mean, that almost comes into the strategies piece. So we'll come to that, because I think that's just such a brilliant way of like, let's air it. But yeah, thank you.
Into the fire.
Get real, like authenticity.
I think Emma's gone. Chris, you go.
Gone. So I'm doing the, you know, anticipating the question is, in my experience, as I said, I probably haven't ever really felt too much of an imposter, but university was the closest I ever came to it. And there I went from having done I did my first degree. It sounds so pretentious, my first degree, moving on. I never finished them, so don't get too excited. But my first degree I did online at home, distance university, in the days when they still posted you letters because we didn't have the internet. But when I went to full-time uni as a postgrad and suddenly realized people were cleverer than me. But I think that was more of a reality check. It wasn't a case that I was wrong in that. I actually was not as smart as them. So for me, it was more of a bit of a pride check rather than imposter syndrome. I mean, I've encountered it in others, but I'm fortunate to say it's never really, I can't claim it as much as others of you can. Michelle, I can imagine if I ever had the glory of writing a book, I probably would go very quickly into imposter syndrome. It would be nerve-wracking, but
it was the worst part of like, what are people going to say? Emma's back.
I'm back. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So yeah, of all the times for the Wi-Fi in the whole building to go down, but there we are. So that was so good. And what I'd like to do now is actually, I'll talk for a moment about my experience of imposter syndrome, and then we're going to go into the practical tools. So my experience, like some of you, limited because I've run my own business for so long. It's I haven't had to have imposter syndrome. However, in one very key and perhaps interesting area, I used to get terrified of public speaking, like the kind of you can't breathe sort of thing. And I was running London Speech Workshop, and I had developed a methodology for delivering presentations. And so when I had, and it worked, like we had clients, it worked, but it didn't work for me. And so it was this awful secret. And I had what you described, the expert, the exposed expert. And for me, because it was awful, it's like, how could I possibly have a method for this when it doesn't work for me and I can't tell people that? And actually the big shift for me was about authenticity, by which I mean when I was able to fully own that it didn't matter if I was nervous, because I had something to say, and it was about me wanting to get my message out there and going, it's my message. And if my message is important to me, that's what I've got. I'm not anybody else. I'm just me. And I can be me with a shaky voice as long as I've got a message. I don't have to be, some concept of what the expert looks like. And that shifted everything for me. So we've got more tools that we use with our clients, which I will come to later. But that was a big change. So now back to you guys. So we're now going to go into tools. Because of time, we're going to have to be quite concise about this. So about sort of roughly a minute each. And Chris, I would love to start with you. What's your top tool for coping with imposter syndrome?
I think just very quickly a background to it. I'm interested in the fact that we have an emotional brain and we have a thinking brain. And if people think of imposter syndrome as being about feelings, then the one thing to understand about our emotional brain is that it's more powerful and faster. So we have to picture it like a charging woolly mammoth, and it's going completely ballistic in our brains. And the only way we're going to get it under control is to use our thinking brain. So it's all around thinking. It's all around getting those thoughts to control the feelings. And if there's just one thing I can say here, is if your thoughts can't help you, borrow someone else's. So you might have to borrow a brain. And in extreme cases, it may be a therapist. Somebody who can actually say, hold on, my head's telling me you shouldn't be thinking like this. And if it's not a therapist, and I can't emphasize enough, if you're really, 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 really bothered by this, go to therapy. But if you need a friend, have someone you trust, someone you believe will be honest with you, and use their voice of reason when you've got the woolly mammoth in your head.
That's brilliant. I love it. Thinking brain over woolly mammoth. Excellent. Michelle, over to you.
So yeah, I've got about a whole book's worth of tools, but I think we're going to borrow somebody else's book. Mel Robbins, The 5-Second Rule. So it's all about action breeds confidence. No one's ever going to feel like they're ready if it's something new. So literally count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, jump into it. And the more that you practice that bravery, which is not a personality trait, the more you're going to act courageous and brave. So it's take a deep breath and jump is the best way.
Wow. And has that worked for you?
Yes. It's like deep breath. The deep breath's really helpful, but yeah, then just I'm here now. Let's just go with it.
Let's do it. I like that, the 5-second rule. Brilliant. Okay, this is good. And finally, Katie, over to you.
I think if I was drawing it back to a workplace perspective, what I think is really important is for leaders to have that openness to talk about these issues themselves, to make sure that you've got the right DE&I policies in place, that everybody feels able to have those types of open conversations. But I think mentoring and learning and development is really, really important, having people that will advocate for you, and making sure that you've got really robust, continuous feedback cycles for people as well, because it's important for people to receive positive feedback to help eliminate imposter syndrome, to see that they're doing things well and that there isn't a need necessarily to feel that imposter syndrome because what everybody else is seeing is really positive. I
love that. Chris, did you have something?
Our research found, quite interestingly, that 36% of people with imposter syndrome imagined that their managers could never have it. And 26%, an additional 26% thought they didn't know. And Katie, that resonated the minute you said that. That authenticity from a manager to say, I also feel like this. It's so empowering for somebody who thinks they're alone and they're junior, and that their senior managers don't feel it. The other thing I've read as well is that you should mentor if you have imposter syndrome, and instead of just being mentored. And I think, Michelle, that goes into your thing about stepping up almost and stepping in, but to help somebody else with what you're suffering from is quite empowering. So, yeah.
I absolutely love that.
People often say to me, Chris, I can't believe you've got imposter syndrome because you're so confident. And I always say it's not about confidence. That's not what this is.
And so for you, Katie, when it's not about confidence, it's about, like, what is the nugget that you think it is about?
It's about a feeling that you don't quite fit in a place, or you're not quite qualified to be in a place, or you shouldn't be speaking up in a certain scenario. It's about that rather than having confidence to do those things. It's more kind of like the worry of what will happen if you do those things.
Got it. And so, Katie, with you and your imposter syndrome, is it the finding a mentor that has helped you, or have there been a couple of other things that have supported you to manage it?
Yeah, I think mentors have been incredibly important for kind of making you feel that you are at home in a place, but also as well that inclusive environment, I think, has been what's really important, being given the ability and the space. I think it also is something, as Chris alluded to before, it is something that gets easier with age. I don't know if it's because you care a little bit less about it as you get a bit older, or you're a bit more experienced, or you get more comfortable in your own skin. I don't know what it is, but I definitely I don't experience it to the same levels that I did when I was younger, less experienced, more likely to be the only woman in certain situations, that type of thing.
Yeah, interesting. So just a natural process of aging can actually move us away from it. So that's great. We've got thinking brain versus mammoth brain, the 5-second rule, finding your mentor and finding a healthy, non-toxic work environment, mentoring yourself. And then, Michelle, you said you had, a few more. Should we just have one or two of your favorites?
Well, it's kind of understanding the inner critic thing as well. So being able to personify it almost, and realize your inner critic is there to stop you jumping into fires. It's not there to, it doesn't know the difference between you jumping into a fire or you like just about to be embarrassed potentially in front of a room full of investors. So it's all about understanding that they're there because it's a safety mechanism, befriending it, not fighting it, because if you fight it, it's just going to get stronger. But it's sneaky as well. It gets sneakier because it knows you, because it's in your brain. So it's all the ways to sort of befriend your inner critic, understand it's there to protect you, and tell it, I've got this. So it's that inner critic stuff is really key.
That's really useful. Chris, is there any final one? And then I'll give a couple, and then we'll go into Q&A. So Chris, do you have one more that you want to share?
I do like that idea of the fact that, you know, I will prevail. I think that there is, as what Casey was saying there, you know, that idea that, you know, that the knock at the door that's going to reveal that I'm an imposter, that I'm a fraud. They haven't knocked at my door for 22 years. So there's a good, strong possibility they may not actually be standing outside, fist raised. I do think possibly also as journaling, you know, it's something that's died down, you know, this idea of writing things down, recording stuff. But that a lot of the research says keep a record of your achievements. You know, we're also embarrassed about being, you know, up there and being proud of what we do. But keep a record, keep a brag book, so that when those moments go that you're thinking, I can't possibly do this, you can be reminded that you have done it and you were okay and you did well. And I think I love journaling. I really love going back on myself and going, you know what, I was really absolutely terrified when I did that, but it was okay. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. And I think for some of us, that might be our voice of reason.
I love that. Yeah, that's great. And that actually segues really nicely into one of our sort of best tools. We've got two that I think is particularly useful. It's called Secret Sauce. And the idea is that there's a quadrant, but we do a sort of left brain process, or in fact, sorry, not left brain, right brain. So you go into your access, your kind of intuitive, creative through the exercises, and you get to your key qualities and your skills. And then we do a values exercise, you get your values, and you do a superpower exercise, and then you have it all as your secret sauce. And it's this kind of, I mean, we have clients who cry when they discover it, because it kind of gets sort of what's the word, but like bottled down into something really special that you can then be like, oh, this is me, this is my personal magic. And the idea is that it just helps you like fall in love with yourself, your uniqueness, like, oh, because everybody is unique in the world. And actually imposter syndrome is this process of being like, I have to be someone else to belong. And actually when we strip that back and be like, no, I exactly as I am, with all my quirks and unique thinking and perspectives and individuality, that is what is welcome. In fact, that's what people want. And that's like that sort of driver of authenticity is at the heart of like all of our programs that we offer, because it's like, actually, when you bring yourself and you shine as you, other people feel it. And that's where the human connection and magic happens. And if we try and be someone else, it's just kind of, I talk a lot about head up communication. It's like, I'm talking with my brain, saying what I think I should say, and I'm responding. It's like, well, if there's no heart, there's no connection. So actually knowing yourself and kind of falling in love with your uniqueness is, you know, very similar to what you're saying. It cracks it open. And then the other one is called Weakness Alchemy. We have funny, cute names for all of that stuff. I love the mammoth as well. I'm like, mammoth. But we have Weakness Alchemy, and this idea that there's two things. You have the growth gap and the double-edged sword. And growth gaps is where you're going, oh my God, I'm not this, I'm not that, you know, my memory is terrible, I can't do that, I'm awful at this. And actually you then go, well, how can I alchemize that? How can I turn that into a strength, like, or an opportunity for growth? So that's your growth gap. And actually, once you get it out and on paper, there's always an opportunity for growing, whether that's getting your mentor or delegating, it doesn't really matter. There's an opportunity to improve. And the second one, which is the double-edged sword, is actually those things that you have that you're really self-critical about, that you've held on to for a reason. And when you look at them, you're like, well, I've kept on, you know, for example, someone who's a perfectionist, or someone who's like, I'm quite, you know, I say what I think, quite direct. And so I've berated myself about that at times, but actually I love it. And so when you look at it with the whole, well, this has two sides. How can I manage the side that doesn't work so well? And how can I optimize the side that does, and kind of have grace with this trait rather than, you know, beating yourself up? So those are two tools that we find really work as well. Now, I believe we go on to the bit where we open the floor to questions. So please, everybody listening, we would absolutely love to hear your questions. So the first one's come up. So for someone coming from a different race minority and not having a deep voice, what's your suggestion to command speech language in a room filled with people from one race with a loud, clear voice? Really interesting. Thank you for that question, Harsh Art. So is there, who would like to answer that question? Do you have a, Katie, was that you?
It wasn't, but I'm happy to go. I mean, I don't have experience of being somebody from a different racial background, but I do have experience of being the only woman in a room of quite vocal men. In the past, my approach was to try to say something clever really quickly to make it very, very clear that I belonged in the room. Whereas actually with age, what I've found as I've got a little bit more comfortable in those situations is that my superpower actually is sitting back and listening to what they're saying. And actually, because I've got a different perspective from everybody else in the room, I can usually identify something that nobody else has actually thought of. And so I find it's actually better to sit and wait and to listen to how the conversation unfolds, because I can usually be the person who plays devil's advocate in the room and brings something new to the table, which makes everybody rethink and can sometimes completely rethink a strategy in that situation. So I don't think it is about being loud or changing the way that you speak or changing the way that you do things. I think it is about unlocking what it is that you bring to the situation.
I think that is such a lovely approach to that question, and so interesting that we don't have to be the same as everybody else. We can find our gap and our way in, and then use that to hold our space, and actually with whatever voice is yours. That's lovely. Does anyone else have a different take on that?
Could I recommend the writing of someone? Sylvia Ann Hewlett talks about executive presence, and her model is around, it's a three-way thing. She talks about something called gravitas, and she talks about, about standing, those power poses that we talk about. And I was just listening to Harsh R's thing about, this whole voice thing, taking command of the room. If your tone is too high, it really is a challenge, because you can come across as a bit breathless or a bit squeaky or a bit feminine, girly. So it is a case of listening to yourself, recording yourself, as much as we all hate it, but being aware of what I sound like and trying to consciously lower your tone as much as you can. But Hewlett talks about dressing for the part, so that you have this sort of brand almost that you wear, especially if you are the only person in the room, then own it.
I love that. Your own brand.
Your brand. And if it's something small like the colors you wear, or Emma, you and I are both wearing scarves today, that idea of own this image that you've got, step into it almost. So I do recommend Sylvia Ann Hewlett's work around gravitas, communication, and presence, just as maybe something to help with that.
Great, thank you. Michelle, did you have anything to add, or next question?
Well, I think yes, I'm going to disagree slightly with Chris, because I've been beaten over the head with gravitas my entire life, because bubbly, I was brunette until I went grey, so blonde nowish. And I always quite looked, blessed with looking young for my age as well. So I went down the whole kind of, like that poor woman in America that did that weird low voice and now I think she's in jail. To go down that way, it's like, but I think, what you were saying, Emma, is we need to like literally embrace our secret sauce. We need to know what we're good at. And if you're in a room with people who are not letting you talk, like literally, it's like, shh, call it out. It's like, look, I'm here. You want me in this room for some reason. I need to give my opinion. And a talking stick sometimes helps if you're in a room full of chatty fellas. Yes, you're not allowed to talk unless you've got the stick or the shell or the pebble.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent one. I mean, obviously this is sort of what we do, so I could talk for ages on it. I think I would say, I think all of you have really excellent points. I would say that we have something called vocal gravity. So that is about finding the weight of your idea, and it has to come down because it has weight. So that allows for a shift in the energy of what we're delivering and can kind of take that space. There's loads of things about taking up more physical space, etc. So I won't go into them all now because we've got so many juicy questions. So for the next question, I've got one here. So could one's past have an effect on imposter syndrome manifesting in one's adult life? That's a juicy question. I see lots of nods there. So Michelle, I'll put this one to you to start, and let's go around quickly.
So absolutely, the way we're brought up, what we're told as children, the beliefs, from our entire background can be, you're a girl. As a girl, you have to be nice, kind, polite, don't talk too much because that's annoying, and just sort of stay small and stay quiet. So yes, this is generational, like multi-generational conditioning that we're in, and now we're in a beautiful place we can learn how to stop it. Yes, it's like it stops with us. Brilliant. So absolutely.
Chris, anything more to add to that one?
I couldn't say it better than the author. I think Michelle's
Okay, lovely. Katie, did you have anything to add, or are we ready to move on?
No, I think we can move on.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question. So, does the Dunning-Kruger effect have a bearing on the stats relating to education level? So this is interesting. I have zero idea what the Dunning-Kruger is. Did I get a pang of imposter syndrome? And then I was like, I just don't know what it is. So I'm owning it. So who knows what Dunning-Kruger effect is? No one. Whoever asked that, because your name has gone, I think it's, Karen Roberts. Thank you for the question. I'm so excited to research it. And we are actually going to be sending a mail out with some of the questions answered. So I'm going to answer that one personally, but not now because I have no idea what it is. But we will move on to the next question, please. So from Helena Lang, as someone that almost completely loses it when I have to speak in public or present to people, is there a quick trick I can use? So afraid of letting everyone down. Oh, thank you, Helena. Obviously, I have quite a few ideas, but I'm not going to start because I want to get our lovely experience in the room. So does anyone want to dive in on that one? Katie?
I don't mind diving in. Presenting and pitching, speaking publicly is a huge part of my career, and I can remember in more junior roles always feeling extremely anxious about it. And the thing that I found most useful, it's not a quick fix and it doesn't completely take the nerves away, although I would argue that you don't want to take the nerves away because a bit of nervous energy is good. For me, it's in the preparation. The better you know your material, if you could literally say that material forwards, backwards, in the shower, driving along in the car, and you know it inside out, it's like going into a well-known dance routine or singing a song that you just know kind of off the top of your head. If you just know it that well, it can't really go wrong, because you can then it doesn't matter if you don't say it in the same way each time, it will just feel natural and intuitive to you. And that's the biggest thing that's helped me with public speaking.
Brilliant, thank you. Michelle, anything to add there?
Well, what I did was I found myself a public speaking coach. So that's I think the best way, because I think they're professionals. They're there to help you. They know all of the tricks and what will work for you. So I 100% advocate for asking for help.
Thank you. Chris, over to you.
No, I'd agree there. I think that sometimes we do need professional help. We do need to work at these things. And I know that people hate rehearsal. I mean, it's one of the worst things in the world. They think they really get embarrassed standing up in front of a mirror or a significant other saying, can I practice my speech? It's one of the things we try not to do, but it does help. Katie, I've just written a program that has been, largely generated by ChatGPT, and it frightens the life out of me because I don't know it well enough to talk about it. And that's the thing, is that if you don't know, it's not going to help, is it? If you don't know what you're talking about, it'll just add to that really, that genuine feeling. I don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, it's practice.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I think both of those, sort of practice and getting a coach. I would say from my perspective, content, making sure that you've found your why, your values, your authenticity, because that's the plug-in to you, and that's the sort of identifier. So as long as it's your own, then that kind of gives you your right to be there. And so doing the work to get to that magic bit it is really, really important. And then the other thing is about delivery. One trick that I actually taught my 8-year-old who had to do a little speech in class was to have backing singers. So imagine, I always think of Whoopi Goldberg and Sister Act, and you've got a whole range, you've got your nuns behind you or your backing singers. And what happens there when you imagine that they're on your side is it shifts the balance from you putting all your energy out to this audience you can feel are going to gobble you up, and it's very vulnerable making, to I've got my people, it's rebalanced. Your shoulders come back, you own the stage, you get more grounded. So that's one lovely trick that I like. And the other one is actually what I call first moment. So when you come in, you've done your work to make it individual and yours, and you've connected with your reason for speaking. And then you stand and you just take a moment. And all these people want to be interested. They don't want to be bored. So you just take that moment, you ground yourself like a tree, because we also don't like pacing across the stage. And that can be incredibly helpful. Then your backing singers pop up and it's like, oh, okay, I'm here to tell them something that I'm passionate about. So hopefully among those tips, Helena, you've got something that can support you, because it can be tough. Public speaking can be tough. Okay, I think that's it. That's all we've got time for. So just leaves me to say thank you so much, Chris Singleton, Michelle Minnikin, Katie Eborall. You've been amazing, full of knowledge. Have to have more conversations. Thank you, everybody who's come today as well. I really hope it's useful. We'll probably send some kind of survey, or we'll be sending something out that also is useful for you, but we'd love to hear from you on how you found it, and any more topics you want for our next webinar. So thank you to everyone, and have a great day. Enjoy the sunshine.